So, me caveman, let's go. Number 10. The Lost Garden Cities of the Amazon. For most of the last century, the Amazon was sold to us as a pristine wilderness, an untouched green ocean where a few small bands of hunters drifted through the trees, leaving no mark. That picture is now in pieces. In May of 2022, a team led by Heiko Prumers of the German Archaeological Institute, alongside Carla Jaimes Betancourt, Jose Iriarte, Mark Robinson, and Martin Scheich, published a study in the journal Nature that redrew the map of South America. Their tool was light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. From a helicopter, they fired hundreds of thousands of laser pulses at the forest each second. Most pulses hit leaves. A few slipped through to the ground and bounced back. Strip away the canopy in the data, and the bare earth appears. What appeared beneath the Bolivian Amazon was a civilization. The Botai culture thrived here from around the year 500 to the year 1400 in the seasonally flooded savannas of the Llanos de Mojos. And they did not live in scattered huts. They built cities. Two sites stood out. Cotoca, covering 147 hectares, and Landivar, covering 315 hectares. These were the hubs of a four-tiered settlement network sprawling across roughly 4,500 square kilometers. At their cores rose stepped platforms, U-shaped structures, and conical pyramids reaching up to 22 meters into the sky. Radiating outward were dead-straight causeways, running for kilometers, tying the great centers to smaller satellite towns. Canals and reservoirs threaded the whole system together, an engineered landscape of water in a place that floods half the year. Archaeologists call this tropical low-density urbanism. It is the same category of settlement as the Khmer at Angkor or the classic Maya, a spread-out garden city, dense with people yet interwoven with fields and forest. The reason nobody saw it for so long is simple. The Kasarabi built in earth, not stone. Their pyramids, softened by 15 centuries of rain and roots, looked like natural hills. The culture dispersed around the year 1400, before any European set foot there, so no chronicler ever described it. For decades, the standard model insisted the rainforest soil was too poor, and the environment too harsh for complex society. A competing view held that Amazonians only ever lived in small mobile groups. And an older romantic fringe dreamed of lost white cities that never existed. The truth was stranger and more human. People had reshaped the Amazon into a built environment, which raises the question that runs through everything you are about to hear. If a rainforest could hide an entire urban world, what else have we misjudged? And does a civilization really need farms to rise at all? Number 9. Poverty Point, Louisiana. Move north to a low ridge in the northeast corner of Louisiana, overlooking the floodplain of the Mississippi. Here sits one of the most confounding monuments in the Americas, and in 2014 it became Louisiana's only cultural site on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Poverty Point was built between roughly 1700 and 1100 BCE. The confounding part is who built it, not farmers. Hunter-fisher-gatherers, people who lived off the wild richness of the river valley, raised this place. And what they raised is staggering. They moved an estimated 750,000 cubic meters of earth, one woven basket of soil at a time. The layout is deliberate and strange. 6 concentric ridges, each a shallow letter C nested inside the last, curve around a wide flat central plaza. Beyond them stand 5 mounds. The largest, Mound A, rises about 22 meters and takes the rough shape of a bird in flight. When geoarchaeologists T.R. Kidder and Anthony Ortman examined Mound A, they found something that defies the textbook. There were no weathering layers inside it, no lenses of silt from rain, no root growth between stages. The mound appears to have gone up in a single sustained burst, possibly in as little as 90 days. A monument the height of a 7-story building, thrown up in a season by people with no agriculture. The old rule said monumental labor requires a farming surplus to feed the workers. Poverty Point tears that rule apart. Instead of crops, these people harvested a different kind of surplus. Hickory nuts and acorns, fish from the bayous, deer and waterfowl. The river gave them enough to gather in large numbers, and they were connected to a continent. Copper from the Great Lakes, soapstone from the Appalachians, and stone from hundreds of kilometers away all flowed into the site through long-distance exchange. Because good rock was scarce locally, they even made their own cooking stones, small fired clay shapes, archaeologists now call Poverty Point objects. Out in the plaza, magnetometers detected the ghosts of great timber circles, hinting at alignments to the sun or moon. Yet there are no palaces here, no obvious tombs of kings. So the debate runs hot. Was this a permanent city or a pilgrimage center where scattered groups gathered to build together and feast? Did the bird mound encode a cosmology later echoed across the southeast? And why, around 1100 BCE, was it abandoned? Poverty Point predates the famous Adena and Mississippian mound builders by more than 1,000 years. It tells us that ambition and coordination ran deep in the human story long before the first cornfield, and it pushes us to look even further back, into the depths of the Ice Age itself. Number 8. Dolní Věstonice. 29,000 years ago, in what is now the Czech Republic, mammoth hunters were doing something that should have been impossible for their time. They were firing clay in kilns. The site is Dolní Věstonice, an open-air settlement of the Gravettian culture south of Brno. Its most famous object is a small figure of a woman, about 11 centimeters tall, known as the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. She is the oldest known fired ceramic object anywhere on Earth. Think about what that means. The first ceramic technology in human history was not used to make bowls or storage jars. It was used to make art. This inverts one of our most basic assumptions, that pottery was born from the practical need to cook and store food. Here the need was symbolic. The people of Dolní Věstonice built at least 2 kilns, domed ovens of earth with glowing coals inside. Around them, archaeologists recovered roughly 7,000 fired ceramic fragments and more than 2,000 small balls of burnt clay. They modeled mammoths, lions, bears, rhinos, horses, foxes, and owls. The clay was fired at temperatures between 500 and 800 degrees Celsius, a controlled pyrotechnology 15,000 years before the first farming villages, and there is a deeper mystery in how they fired it. The materials scientist Pamela Vandiver found that many figurines were made from wet clay deliberately shoved into the fire so that they would crack and explode from thermal shock. The breaking may have been the point, an act of ritual rather than a manufacturing failure. The Venus herself was shaped from a single piece of clay mixed with ground bone as a temper. Impressions of woven textiles and basketry pressed into fired clay reveal that these Ice Age people also spun fiber and wove cloth. The site holds haunting burials too. A triple grave of 3 young individuals arranged in an unusual pose, and the grave of a woman whose face was deformed, alongside a small carved ivory portrait that may show those very features. It was first excavated by Karel Absalon in the 1920s, and later by Bohuslav Klima. Why did they invest so much in figures they sometimes intended to destroy? Some researchers see hunting magic, a way to exert power over the animals they pursued. Others see status objects, or simply experimentation by curious minds. Whatever the reason, the lesson is clear. Symbolic thought and advanced craft ran deep in humans, tens of thousands of years before cities. And if Ice Age hunters could master fire and clay, what were the foragers of a warming world building as the glaciers pulled back? Number 7. Star Carr. As the last Ice Age released its grip around 9000 BCE, a community settled on the shore of an ancient lake in what is now North Yorkshire, England. The site is Star Carr, and it has quietly overturned the idea that post-glacial Britons were simple wanderers. The most astonishing finds, are the headdresses. 33 of them, made from the skulls and antlers of red deer, trimmed and bored with holes so they could be worn. It is the largest collection of such objects in Europe. Archaeologists interpret them as the regalia of shamans, or as disguises for the hunt, or perhaps both. Either way, they are windows into a rich ritual life 11,000 years ago. But Carr offers more than ceremony. The people here built. Along the lake edge, they laid a platform of split and hewn timber, the earliest evidence of carpentry in Europe. They raised at least one post-built structure about 3.5 meters across, among the oldest known dwellings in Britain. The reason we know all this is a quirk of preservation. The waterlogged peat sealed out oxygen and kept organic material intact. Antler, bone, wood, birch bark, all of it survived for 11,000 years. The settlement spread across nearly 2 hectares, with an estimated 30 meters of constructed waterfront. Excavators recovered 227 barbed antler points, again the largest such collection in Britain. There were birch bark rolls, evidence of making birch tar, a sophisticated glue that requires precise heating. There were beads of shale and amber, and an engraved shale pendant that ranks among the earliest art in the country. The first great excavations were led by Graham Clark between 1949 and 1951. Renewed work by Nicky Milner, Chantal Conneller, and Barry Taylor, running from 2004 to 2015, transformed our understanding of the place. Their evidence suggests the site was occupied for centuries, not a fleeting camp, but a returning home. Debate continues over whether the headdresses were mainly spiritual or practical, and over just how permanent the settlement really was. There is also a race against time here. As modern drainage dries the peat, the very chemistry that preserved Carr is now destroying it. The wider point holds. Long before farming reached Britain, its people were skilled builders and ritual specialists, working wood and fire and symbol. From forager craft, then, we turn to the first farmers of the Near East, and to a kind of art that stares straight back at us. Number 6. Ain Ghazal, Ki. On the outskirts of modern Amman, in Jordan, lies a Neolithic town that was once one of the largest settlements on Earth. Ain Ghazal, the spring of the gazelle, was occupied from around 7,200 to 5,000 BCE. At its height, it may have covered 15 hectares, several times the size of contemporary Jericho, home to thousands of people. And these early farmers made something that shatters our image of what Neolithic people were capable of. In 1983, excavators uncovered a cache of 26 statues. 2 years later, in 1985, they found a second cache of about 6 more. Together, roughly 32 figures made between 7,200 and 6,250 BCE. They are among the oldest large-scale human representations ever created. Their construction was ingenious. The makers bundled reeds into a frame, tied them with cord, then coated the whole armature in white lime plaster and modeled it into a human shape. The largest stand, nearly a meter tall. Their eyes were outlined, and their pupils marked with bitumen, natural asphalt carried from the Dead Sea. Some of the figures are two-headed, 2 faces sharing a single body. Scholars still argue over what this meant. A symbol of duality, of twins, of paired ancestors. The same community also made plastered human skulls, coating the bones of the dead in features of plaster, part of a widespread Levantine tradition of venerating ancestors. All of this rested on a mastery of lime pyrotechnology, burning limestone at high heat to produce plaster for floors, walls, and art. That very technology may have doomed them, since fueling the kilns and clearing the land could have driven the deforestation that helped end the settlement. Excavations led by Gary Rollofson and Zaidan Kafafi from 1982 onward revealed rectangular houses with plastered floors and burials beneath them. The statues themselves were deliberately buried in pits, perhaps after a period of display in some ritual. Their abstract, wide-eyed faces feel startlingly modern, and they force us to admit that monumental figurative art arrived with the very first farming villages, not thousands of years later with the first kings. Organized art on this scale implies organized society, yet organization does not always mean farming. Because far to the northeast, on the open steppe, people were about to tame one of the animals that would remake the world, and the story of how they did it is far messier than we were taught. Number 5. The Botai Culture. Around 3700 to 3100 BCE, in the grasslands of northern Kazakhstan, a people called the Botai lived a life built almost entirely around one animal, the horse. At their settlements, places like Botai and Krasny Yar, horse bones outnumber the remains of every other creature combined. In 2009, the archaeologist Alan Outram and colleagues published 3 lines of evidence in the journal Science, arguing that the Botai had domesticated the horse. First, they measured the cannon bones of the horse's legs and found them slender like Bronze Age domestic horses, not stocky like local wild ones. Second, they found wear on the horse's premolar teeth, the kind of damage a bit and bridle leave behind, suggesting these animals were harnessed and perhaps ridden. Third, and most vivid, they analyzed fatty residues soaked into Botai pottery and detected the signature of mare's milk. To milk a mare, you must control the herd. This pushed the domestication of the horse back to around 3500 BCE and placed its birth on the Central Asian steppe. It was a clean, powerful story. Then ancient DNA broke it open. In 2018, a genetic study revealed that Botai horses are not the ancestors of the modern domestic horse at all. They are the ancestors of Przewalski's horse, the stocky wild horse of the Mongolian plains. The animals we ride today descend from a different domestication. Later, around 2000 BCE, on the western steppe north of the Black and Caspian Seas. In other words, humans tamed the horse more than once, and the Botai line was a separate, earlier experiment that led, in a sense, to a dead end. Then, in 2021, another team re-examined the bit wear and the bone measurements, and cautioned that some of those signatures might come from hunting and butchery rather than riding. So the Botai remain a living, scientific argument rather than a closed case. What is not in doubt is that these people lived among vast numbers of horses, dug pit houses, and left corrals whose soil is still rich in the chemistry of penned animals. If they did ride, theirs is the earliest horseback in human history. And there is a beautiful irony buried here. Przewalski's horse, long celebrated as the last truly wild horse on Earth, may in fact be the feral descendant of animals the Botai once tamed. The wild was never quite as wild as we assumed. Neither, it turns out, was the desert. Number 4. Gobero and the Green Sahara. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on the planet, a place we picture as timelessly dead. It is nothing of the kind. In the year 2000, the paleontologist Paul Sereno was hunting for dinosaur bones in the Tenere Desert of Niger when his team stumbled onto human skeletons eroding out of the sand. They had found Gobero, the oldest known cemetery in the Sahara, and a window into a world that has been utterly erased. Gobero preserves about 5,000 years of human occupation during a period scientists call the African Humid period, when the Sahara was green. Rain filled great lakes. Hippos and crocodiles wallowed. Fish crowded the shallows. And people lived on the shores of a lake in what is now one of the driest places on Earth. Two very different cultures buried their dead here. The older were the Kifian, who lived from roughly 8,000 to 6,000 BCE. They were tall and powerfully built, some over 6 feet, and they fished the lakes with barbed bone harpoons. Then came a harsh, dry spell, and the area emptied. When the rains and the lakes returned, around 4600 BCE, a new people arrived, the Tenarian, slighter in build, who herded cattle and buried their dead with elaborate care. The most famous grave at Gobero holds a woman and 2 children, laid down about 5,300 years ago, their hands still interlocked, traces of flowers around them. Sereno and his colleagues documented more than 200 burials and published their findings in the journal PLOS ONE in 2008 in a paper titled Lakeside Cemeteries in the Sahara. They found fishhooks, pottery, and ornaments of ivory and bone, the debris of ordinary lives lived beside vanished water. What killed this world was not war, but the sky. Slow shifts in Earth's orbit, the Milankovitch cycles, weakened the African monsoon, and over centuries, the green Sahara dried into the desert we know. Some scholars believe that as the water retreated, populations were pushed toward the Nile, helping seed the civilization of ancient Egypt. Gobero forces a hard correction. Places that now look like they could never hold a civilization once cradled entire peoples, whose whole way of life is buried beneath the sand. Preservation, though, can also be a matter of building to last, as one community did on a windswept island in the far north. Number 3. The Ness of Brodgar. On the Orkney Islands, off the northern tip of Scotland, a narrow strip of land runs between 2 lochs. This isthmus holds a discovery that has upended the way we think about the flow of ideas in prehistoric Europe. The Ness of Brodgar, excavated from 2004 under Nick Carr, revealed a complex of more than 100 buildings, in use from around 3300 to 2300 BCE. That timing matters. The Ness predates the great sarsen stones of Stonehenge by at least a couple of centuries. The old story of prehistoric Britain flowed from a sophisticated south to a primitive north. The Ness reverses the arrows. Grooved ware, a style of pottery that spread across all of Britain and Ireland, is now thought to have originated here in Orkney. Excavators have recovered around 80,000 sherds of it. At the heart of the site stands Structure 10, a building some 25 meters long with walls up to 5 meters thick. So imposing, it is sometimes called a Neolithic cathedral. The whole precinct was ringed by a monumental barrier nicknamed the Great Wall of Brodgar, and the buildings were decorated. Archaeologists found stones painted with red, yellow, and orange pigments, the earliest known wall decoration in Northern Europe, along with hundreds of stones incised with geometric art. Some roofs were even tiled with stone slabs. This ceremonial center sits between 2 of Britain's most famous stone monuments, the Ring of Brodgar and the Standing Stones of Stennis, among the oldest stone circles in the land. Around 2300 BCE, the site was closed down in an extraordinary act. A feast that consumed the bones of hundreds of cattle marked the deliberate decommissioning of Structure 10. The scale of all this implies a society able to organize labor and resources across the islands and beyond. Was the Ness a temple, a gathering place for the living, or a complex of elite power? Did the ideas born here in pottery and architecture really travel south to shape monuments like Durrington Walls near Stonehenge? The final large excavation season ran in 2024, and the debate is far from over. What is certain is that a small island community at the edge of the world built one of the most ambitious architectural projects of Neolithic Europe. And on the theme of societies that break our rules, few break them as cleanly as a kingdom that ruled without ever planting a field. Number 2. The Calusa. When Spanish ships reached southwest Florida in the 16th century, they met the most politically complex society in the region. A kingdom with a paramount king, a hereditary elite, an army, and subordinate towns that paid tribute. By every measure, it looked like a state. and it had no agriculture at all. The Calusa were fishers, gatherers, and hunters, and their power rose not from grain, but from the sea. Their capital was Mound Key, an artificial island in Estero Bay, built almost entirely from shell. Over roughly 1,500 years, the Calusa and their ancestors piled up at least 500,000 cubic meters of oyster shell into an island covering about 51 hectares. The engine of this kingdom was revealed by William Marquardt, Karen Walker, and their colleagues in a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2020. Beside the king's residence, they identified structures they call water courts. These were large rectangular pens, walled off from the estuary with embankments of oyster shell, each roughly the size of a basketball court. The Calusa used them to hold fish alive, a living larder. By corralling and then smoking and drying their catch, they created exactly the kind of storable food surplus that other societies squeezed out of farming. That surplus supported a population estimated as high as 20,000 people and freed labor for monumental construction. They dug canals, some running for kilometers, raised causeways, and reshaped the estuary to their needs. Spanish accounts describe a great house at the Calusa capital said to hold 2,000 people and a court of ceremony and power. This was no fragile arrangement. The Calusa resisted Spanish missionaries and soldiers for nearly 2 centuries, far longer than most groups in Florida. When they finally collapsed in the 1700s, the cause was European disease and slave raiding, not any failure of their own system. Their art survives in objects like the famous Key Marco cat, a small wooden carving of astonishing craftsmanship, evidence of a deep symbolic world. Archaeologists now rank the Calusa among the most politically complex non-agricultural societies known anywhere on Earth. Their story sits beside other affluent foragers, like the peoples of the Pacific Northwest, and together they dismantle the textbook link between farming and the birth of kingdoms. So if agriculture is not the trigger that sparks a civilization, what is? The answer, or at least the most dramatic clue we have, waits on a stony hilltop in southeastern Turkey. Number 1. Karahan Tepe and the Tepeler. In the hills of Şanlıurfa province, in southeastern Turkey, lies the single strongest piece of evidence that the story we were told is backwards. The site is Karahan Tepe, some 11 to 12,000 years old, about 35 kilometers from its more famous sibling, Göbekli Tepe. Together, they belong to a cluster of at least a dozen related sites, known as Tepeler, the Stone Hills. Systematic excavation of Karahan Tepe began in 2019 under Necmi Karul of Istanbul University. What his team has uncovered is difficult to absorb. In one semi-subterranean chamber, cut straight into the bedrock, stand 11 tall pillars, phallic and T-shaped, carved from the living rock. From the wall, a human head sculpted in stone gazes out at them, one of the earliest three-dimensional scenes ever composed by human hands. In 2023, the excavators found a nearly life-size human statue, more than 2 meters tall, gripping its own body, a work of figurative art of shocking sophistication. Here is the detail that changes everything. The earliest builders of Tepeler show no evidence of domesticated plants or animals. They were hunter-gatherers, sedentary, but not farmers. The old model was a neat staircase. First, people learned to farm. Farming creates a food surplus. The surplus frees some people from the fields. Those people build temples and cities and invent religion. Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe turn that staircase upside down. Here the monuments and the religion came first, while the people were still hunting and gathering. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who began excavating Göbekli Tepe in the 1990s, summed it up in a single phrase. First the temple, then the city. Göbekli Tepe's great enclosures were raised between roughly 9600 and 8200 BCE. Its T-shaped pillars stand up to 5.5 meters tall and weigh more than 10 tons each. And they are not blank posts. They are bodies, carved with arms, with hands meeting at the belt, with belts and loincloths. They are stylized beings, perhaps ancestors or gods. Across both sites, reliefs show snakes, foxes, boars, vultures, and scorpions, a menagerie of the wild rendered in stone. To quarry, carve, move, and raise these pillars took the organized labor of many people, coordinated without a state, without kings, without a farming surplus to pay them. When each phase ended, the builders deliberately buried their monuments, an act of ritual closure that, by accident, preserved them for us. And there is a final, elegant twist. These temples sit beside the Karahan Mountains, the very region where geneticists have traced the domestication of einkorn wheat. It may be that the great gatherings drawn to these ritual centers, the crowds that needed feeding, created the pressure that pushed people to farm in the first place. If so, then religion did not follow agriculture. Religion helped invent it. Some fringe voices read the carvings as records of a comet strike at the end of the Ice Age, a claim mainstream archaeologists reject, but the core finding needs no embellishment. On this hilltop, the assumption that civilization begins with the plow lies buried under the oldest temples on Earth. Step back from the 10, and a pattern emerges that is hard to unsee. Again and again, the thing we treated as the trigger for civilization, agriculture, turns out to be neither necessary nor first. Poverty Point rose from fishing and foraging. The Calusa ruled a kingdom on stored fish. The builders of Tepeler raised the oldest temples in the world while still hunting wild game. And where farming was present, as at Ain Ghazal, the art and organization outran everything we expected of early farmers. The same reversal appears in technology and symbol. Dolní Věstonice fired ceramics for ritual 29,000 years ago, long before anyone made a pot to cook in. Carr's foragers built platforms and wore antler crowns 11,000 years ago. The Kasarabe engineered a rainforest into a network of cities. The recurring mistake was ours. We assumed that a society without writing, without metal, without fields laid out in rows, must be simple. We measured the past against a checklist drawn from our own world, and when the checklist came up short, we called those people primitive. The evidence says otherwise. Complexity took many roads. Some ran through grain, and many did not. What actually distinguishes these societies is not a single technology, but the human capacity to organize, to imagine, and to build together at scale. Whether the surplus came from hickory groves, oyster beds, or wild game, the crucial ingredient was always people willing to pool their labor toward a shared vision, and leaders or beliefs able to hold them to it. That capacity is ancient, far older than the first farm, and it appears wherever people gathered in numbers and shared a purpose. The listicle you just heard is really one argument told 10 ways. Prehistoric civilization was not a single ladder that every people climbed at the same pace. It was a wide field of experiments, and we have only just begun to find the ones that do not fit our story. It is worth asking how we know all this now, when we did not a generation ago. The answer is that the tools of archaeology have changed as radically as the picture they produce. Airborne LiDAR, the laser scanning that exposed the Kasarabe cities, has done the same across the Maya lowlands and beyond, revealing that dense settlement hid under forests we assumed were empty. Organic residue analysis, the chemistry that pulled the trace of mare's milk from Botai pottery, lets us reconstruct ancient diets and animal management from invisible fats soaked into clay. Strontium and oxygen isotopes locked in ancient teeth now let researchers trace where an individual was born and how far they traveled, turning a single skeleton into a map of a life. Ancient DNA, the technique that dethroned the Botai horse as our ancestor, has rewritten migrations, domestications, and family trees across the world, often overturning conclusions once thought secure. Waterlogged and anaerobic preservation, the accident of chemistry that saved the wood and antler of Carr, hands us organic worlds that normally rot to nothing. Geoarchaeology and precise dating let researchers at Poverty Point read the absence of weathering inside a mound and conclude it went up in a single season. None of these methods existed in mature form when the textbook narratives were written. Each one has, on its own, forced a major revision. Together, they mean the deep past is not a settled story, but an active frontier. Every few years, a new technique reads an old site in a new way, and something we were certain of falls. This is not a weakness of the science. It is the point of it. A field that never overturned its own conclusions would not be studying the past. It would be reciting it. The lesson for anyone watching is a kind of humility. What we confidently believe about prehistoric people today is provisional, and some of it will be wrong by the time the next tool arrives. Run back through the 10, and another force keeps appearing, shaping every one of these worlds. Climate. It is the invisible author behind the whole story, and often the eraser too. The green Sahara gave rise to the lakeside peoples of Gobero, and when slow shifts in Earth's orbit weakened the monsoon, the same climate that made that world unmade it, burying it in sand. The warming that ended the Ice Age opened the lush lake margins that the people of Carr settled. At Ain Ghazal, the community may have helped destroy its own environment, stripping the land to feed its plaster kilns until the settlement could no longer sustain itself. The temples of Tepeler rose in the unstable centuries around the end of the Younger Dryas, a cold snap that reshaped the entire Near East. Even the Cassarabe cities of the Amazon existed within a delicate balance of flood and drought that their canals and reservoirs were built to manage. These were not people living outside of nature. They were entangled with it at every turn, rising when the climate allowed and falling when it turned against them. That entanglement is a mirror. We tend to imagine ourselves as the first civilization to face a changing climate, uniquely exposed. The deep past says otherwise. Societies have been made and broken by shifts in rainfall, temperature, and sea level for tens of thousands of years. What is new is not the challenge, but our awareness of it, and our ability to read the record of those earlier worlds. Their triumphs and their collapses are not just curiosities. They are the longest experiment we have in how human communities respond when the environment that sustains them begins to change. For all these discoveries, the honest truth is that the questions outnumber the answers, and the biggest sites are barely touched. We do not know who ruled Poverty Point, or whether anyone ruled it at all, or whether its builders lived there year-round, or gathered from across the region to raise it together. We do not know for certain whether the Botai people truly rode horses, or only hunted and milked them, and the Bitware debate remains unsettled. We do not know what the two-headed statues of Ain Ghazal were meant to say, whether they represent twins, ancestors, or a duality we cannot recover. We do not know why the Cassarabe cities of the Amazon were abandoned around the year 1400 before any outsider recorded them. At Karahan Tepe, only a small fraction of the site has been excavated, and every season seems to bring a discovery that reshapes the interpretation. We cannot yet say for sure whether the ideas born at the Ness of Brodgar truly traveled south to influence the monuments of Stonehenge, or whether both grew from a shared world of contact. This uncertainty is not a failure. It is the living edge of a field still in motion. Each of these sites is a book with most of its pages still buried, and the temptation to fill the gaps with confident stories is exactly the temptation that gave us the wrong picture in the first place. The most valuable thing an honest account of the deep past can do is mark clearly where knowledge ends and speculation begins. What we can say is that the ground still holds far more than we have found, and the story is nowhere near finished. If there is one idea to carry away from all of this, it is that the word prehistoric was never a synonym for primitive. The people in this story were as intelligent, as creative, and as capable of organization as anyone alive today. They engineered rainforests and estuaries, fired ceramics in the depths of the Ice Age, carved temples before they planted crops, and raised monuments the size of hills with nothing but baskets and coordinated effort. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was writing and metal, and the particular package of traits we decided, in hindsight, must define civilization. We mistook the absence of our own markers for the absence of achievement, and so an entire human past was quietly filed away as a prologue, a dim waiting room before real history began. That filing was a mistake, and it is being undone site by site, laser scan by laser scan, genome by genome. The deep past is turning out to be richer, older, and stranger than the textbooks allowed, full of cities that should not have existed, and kingdoms that broke every rule. You now stand where the evidence stands, seeing these people not as our crude ancestors, but as fellow experimenters in the long human project of living together. The next time you hear that civilization began in a single place, at a single moment with the first field of wheat, remember the temples that came before the farms, and the cities hidden under the trees. Everything we knew about prehistoric civilizations really was wrong. And the most exciting part is that we are still finding out how wrong.